screen allowed. Yeah. Okay. So in the last class, I had introduced the classical macroeconomic model, and we had focused on the supply side. Now I'll start today. I'll consider I will discuss the demand side, but before that, let us go into just recapitulate the main elements of the classical system, and also discuss one or two points, compare it with the Keynesian system in greater details. So, yeah, okay. So we had said that in the classical system, we have the labor market where demand for labor by the firms is a function of real wages. In fact, both demand and supply of labor is a function of real wages, W by P. And the real wage where ND is equal to NS, that will give us the equilibrium in the labor market. Sorry, there's a mistake over here. I just want to change this flag. Sorry, this will create a confusion later on. So let me make it population. So given that population, we have a constant supply of workers. Yeah. And the production function is a function of labor and capital. The capital, as you can see from the bar, is constant. So that means output is a function of the labor employed. Now, given that population is constant in the short run, we have a constant supply of workers. Or rather, what we can say, we have a constant supply of potential workers. The actual number of workers will obviously be given by the intersection of the demand and supply curves for labor. Okay. Now, if we have equilibrium in the labor market, then there is no unemployment, and the resulting output level, which we call Y star, is called full employment output. Okay. In the classical model, one of the most important features is that the equilibrium occurs at a full employment level. So there's no unemployment. We will come to this more later on towards the end of the class. Why we always have full employment. But the point that I want to emphasize now is that only if the equilibrium labor is changed, Y star will change. So that means Y depends only upon the labor supply. So that means now when does N change? N will change, or rather N star will change if there's a shift in the labor demand curve or a shift in the labor supply curve. Therefore, if we come to the commodity market, the change is occurring in the supply side of the commodity market. Demand for commodities does not come into the picture. As a result of this, the supply curve becomes vertical, unlike the Keynesian case. If you compare the Keynesian case, you will remember that in the Keynesian's supply curve was horizontal, parallel to the x-axis. So depending upon the demand, output changed. It could have been this, it could have been. Did anyone have a question? Okay. So depending upon what the demand curve is, we are going to have.
Question. Here,
Yes.
will the price also not be changing? So if the price changes, then that will also be affecting.
Okay. I won't answer your question. Let's come to the end of this slide. And you can ask it again if you want. Okay. So this is the Keynesian demand curve. Okay. The supply curve is horizontal. Any output can be supplied at the same price. Therefore, supply is demand driven. Prices do not change. Right? This is the Keynesian case, the one that we had discussed in the earlier semester. In contrast, the classical supply curve is vertical, like this. What does it imply? Now, instead of price being sticky, output is constant. Output is constant at the full employment level. Prices can, however, vary. So, if demand changes, there will be an adjustment of prices so that the market will always clear. Okay. So, who asked the question about prices?
Sir, me.
আমি এখন স্লাইড দেখতে পাচ্ছি।
Sir, Udita.
আচ্ছা। Okay. So, what was your question exactly? Regarding the Keynesian case or the classical supply case?
No, no, I was talking about the classical side only. It has been clear.
Yeah. So, as you can see, price will change. Not only it can change, it will change. Price is the equilibrating mechanism. Okay. Now, when we come to the price adjustment mechanism, see the
Sir,
aggregate
can
supply.
you show the previous slide once? Just once.
So, the green is the classical and blue is the Keynesian case.
Yes, sir, done.
Okay. So the aggregate supply curve in the classical model describes the price adjustment mechanism in the economy. Look into this panel. This is the classical supply curve, right? And we have different supply curves actually. So we can think this is the Keynesian case, the black line, and the blue line is the classical case. Okay. So what we can think of is that as time changes, the Keynesian case starts rotating in an anti-clockwise manner. Okay, so the slope is zero over here. It becomes the steep starts. It becomes the slope starts increasing little by little until it becomes perfectly vertical. Okay, and you can see that these are the intersections with the demand curve. Okay. Now, what is the logic? How we interpret it is different. Do you understand what I have drawn or what has been drawn over here?
Sir, what is T here?
T is time.
Time.
Yeah. So that means as the time is flowing, the curve is moving, rotating like this. Initially, we had this line t equal to 0. In the next period, we had t equal to 1. Third period, this is the supply curve, then this one. And finally, we come to this. So we can think of the price adjustment using this equation. What pt plus 1 pt means, it should be clear to you. This is the price at the current price in the future. This lambda is a positive adjustment mechanism, and y is the actual output, y star is the potential of full employment output. Okay. So that means if, for instance, your actual output is greater than the potential output, okay, the full employment output, in that case, or you can say that Y is the demand for output. Okay, so suppose the demand for output is greater than the potential output. So in that case, we have excess demand, and you can see that PT plus 1 will be PT plus this part. Okay, the adjustment goes up. That means PT plus 1 will be greater than PT. So if Y is greater than Y star, then price is going to rise in the successive periods. If Y is less than Y star, this will be negative. That means price will go down with the passage of time. Again, is it clear?
So can you explain once again?
Okay. Okay, just give me a moment. I'll set up my tab.
So while you do that, can you show the first slide once more, please?
This
Before
one or
this one.
before this?
Thank you, sir.
Let me know when you're finished, please.
Yes, sir, I'm finished. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Sorry, I've gone a bit ahead. Acha. In fact, I don't want this. Acha. Okay, so what we are saying is this is the supply curve when time is 0. Or, okay. And we have a price adjustment mechanism. Rather, let us make it 1. And the price adjustment mechanism is, this is 1, by the way. This is the full employment output level, Y star. Now let Y be greater than Y star. So that means this will be positive, right? So the equation becomes, and remember that lambda also is positive. Right? So PT 1 plus something, theta is greater than 1. So what will be the relation between PT plus 1 and PT? Let us suppose theta is greater than 1. Let us say theta is 1.5. PT is, let us say, 2. What will be PT plus 1?
Greater than PT.
It will be 3. It will be greater than PT. Now, in the next period, again we find this. So, again going by the same logic, we are going to have ঠিক আছে? And so if we extend this, and as time is increasing, PT is increasing. প্রাইসটা বেড়ে যাচ্ছে। And if you have the opposite, তাহলে কি হবে? As time increases, price will fall. Yes. So this is the aggregate demand curve. So what is the price? This is the price. এবার ধরো তোমার সাপ্লাই কার্ভটা একটুখানি শিফট করে গেল, t is equal to 2. What is happening to price? Price is going up a little. So this is P1, this is P2, this is P3. Okay, so this is how I have drawn this diagram. This is the adjustment mechanism. আর এখানে দেখো, এখানে যেটা হচ্ছে যে প্রাইস y is greater than y star. So with the passage of time, this is p and this is y. With the passage of time, y is going up in each period. In the first period, this is the price. In the second period, price goes up, and in each period, price increases. It's higher than the earlier price in the earlier level. If you think about it carefully, if you again go back to this equation, you are going to see another thing. I'll just show it for one period. What is PT plus 2? It is PT plus 1 আচ্ছা, এই ল্যামডা পার্টটাকে ধরো তোমরা, আমরা একটা জাস্ট সিম্পলিফাইং বলছি, consider this to be gamma. Okay. Now, what is PT plus 1? This is PT 1 plus gamma. ঠিক আছে? So basically what is happening is your successive prices আর আ কিউমুলেশন। প্রত্যেকটা যে প্রাইস ইনক্রিজ করছে, the increase in every period is only by this much. Okay, but it is getting aggregated. What is the total price increase? It is this much. This much in the first period, this much in the second period. And here we have the accumulation of all the price increases in all the earlier periods. So you have to understand the long run supply curve as a accumulation of earlier price movements. Now, when will prices not change? When will prices be stable?
Y minus Y star is equal to 0.
Okay, so this is called the GDP gap, and if this is 0, then prices will be stable. PT will be equal to PT plus 1. As a matter of fact, we can have inflation even if the GDP gap is equal to 0. We can introduce inflation into our model, but in that case, we have to incorporate price expectations into our model. Okay. However, we are not introducing price expectations, so we simply assume that if y minus y star is equal to 0, there are no price changes. But if y and y star are not equal, then you can have price changes depending upon whether y is greater than or less than y star. Okay. So lambda can be interpreted as the speed at which price adjusts. So we can. আচ্ছা, এইটা আমি করে নিয়ে আবার প্রিভিয়াস স্লাইডে একটু যাব, তাহলে সুবিধা হয়। আচ্ছা, এইখানে যেটা হচ্ছে, you can see that price is increasing. As time flows by, price is increasing until we have the GDP gap becomes 0. In that case, price will become constant. At the same time, the equilibrium value of y will also is going to fall. As price goes up, we can expect the output to fall because demand is falling. Okay. So ultimately what will happen is price will become stable, output will become stable. See, both of them are horizontal. So you want to see কোন স্লাইডটা তুমি বলছিলে? This one or the earlier slide?
Sir, I had a question. Sir,
আচ্ছা, জাস্ট ওয়ান সেক। I mean, কোন স্লাইডে তোমাদের একজন বললো না যে I want to see a particular slide? This one or the earlier slide? এইটে? আচ্ছা, বলো সেটা। Yeah, what was the question?
Sir, the rotation of the supply curve, I couldn't draw it in the case of the price increasing. Then the curve is becoming negative. So, like, how to draw it when the price is increasing, and how to show the rotation when the price is increasing. So, could you draw it once?
প্রাইস ইনক্রিজিংটা তো আমরা দেখালাম। ইউ মিন প্রাইস ডিক্রিজ?
না না স্যার, মানে এই কেসটাতে, yes sir, মানে the other case where the rotation is on the upper side of t equals to 0.
না, মানে এই কেসে তো তোমার y is greater than y star, so the prices are going up.
As in, মানে prices are falling and
হ্যাঁ, সেটাই আমি বলছি। You want to see when prices are falling. So this is P1. আচ্ছা, prices fall মানে তখন এটা তোমার clockwise rotate করবে। থার্ডটা আমি আর ড্র করতে পারবো না, এটা ইন্টারসেক্ট করবে না। সামথিং ওভার হিয়ার, এইভাবে মানে ইনস্টেড অফ, এখানে দেখো মুভমেন্টটা এরকম হচ্ছে, এখানে মুভমেন্টটা এরকম হবে, ক্লকওয়াইজ মুভমেন্ট হবে।
Okay, sir.
মানে আমি ভালো করে এঁকে দেখিয়ে দেবো কি?
মানে স্যার এটা আঁকতে গেলে তো সাপ্লাই কার্ভ ইজ বিকামিং নেগেটিভ and
So in this case, the movement is starting from the long run curve itself, like from vertical to we are moving to the flatten.
এটা ভালো, তোমার সাপোজ দিস ইজ দ্য ডিমান্ড কার্ভ, আমাকে দু একটা এঁকে নিতে দাও। হ্যাঁ, তো ঠিক আছে। সো দিস ইজ দ্য ইন্টারসেকশন। আচ্ছা, তুমি বলছো সাপ্লাই কার্ভটা আচ্ছা, না তাহলে না, এইভাবে যদি মুভমেন্টটা হয়, or we can think of it better still in this way. Some sort of movements like this. হ্যাঁ, তাহলে তোমার এটাকে ডিলিট করে, so the movement is like this. Again, it's anti-clockwise, so I'm wrong over here. I'd better. ঠিক আছে। ঠিক আছে? Sorry, is it okay?
Sir, then we are not reaching the long run position in this.
না সরি, এখানটা দাঁড়া। না, এখানে তোমার কি হচ্ছে, আচ্ছা, ফর কনভিনিয়েন্স আই এম অ্যাসিউমিং এইভাবে ভাবলে তোমাদের হয়তো একটু সুবিধা হবে। ইট উইল বি ইজিয়ার টু ইন মাইন্ড। ঠিক আছে, তাহলে কি হচ্ছে, এইভাবে মুভ করছি, this line is moving down like this. So what will happen in the long run? Look at this position.
Yes, sir. Then it becomes like vertical.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I'd better draw the vertical also. আমি এটা বোঝার সুবিধার জন্য এইখান দিয়ে রোটেট করাচ্ছি, কিন্তু and I've just drawn it up till this point just to help you to understand. Okay. Okay. So basically what we are suggesting is that in the short run, you're going to have the Keynesian case like this. And in the long run, we are going to go up to this position. So is it a matter of timing, what time period we are considering? So if we are considering a short run, we should look at use a Keynesian supply curve, which is horizontal. If you're considering a long run, we should consider or use the classical aggregate supply curve, which is vertical. Well, there are two reasons why it's not just a matter of timing. It's not a case of long run or short run supply curve. Firstly, in fact, both the reasons are somewhat similar. The aggregates, see, if you look at these curves, or even the one that I have drawn over here, all these are drawn as a straight line. Okay, at every period, the supply curve is a straight line. Whatever the slope, it may be vertical, horizontal, 45 degree, 90 degree, 2050 degree. But it is a straight line. In reality, supply curves are never completely flat. They have a slight tilt, even in the short run. So, I mean, in the Keynesian case, it is never exactly like this. Let me show over here. It's never exactly like this. What will happen is, it's going to be like this. So do you think that, I mean, if you look at it, give a glance to it, you will see that it will appear like a horizontal curve. Okay. But in reality, if you look carefully, you will see that it's very slight. It has a slope. It may be very little. The value of the slope may be very little. But it's still, it has a slope. Why we draw it as a completely flat slope is that, yeah, there is a change in the results, but it is not substantial. The main conclusions that we had drawn in the earlier semester would still have been, by and large, I mean, the difference would have been maybe just 1% or even less. So the assumption of perfectly horizontal supply curve helps us to understand the results. The flip side is it does falsify the results, but never substantially. The result is distorted or biased to such a minor extent that it does not really matter. If I tell you that the national income is, per capita income is 40 per month is 43,000, and someone gets up and say, no, that is wrong, it is 43,001 paisa. Will you say that my statement was wrong? So it's something like that. The other reason is the supply curve. We can think of the supply curve as a curve. Okay, in this part, you can see it is almost horizontal. In this part, it is almost vertical. So what is happening is, in the short run, during recession, Y is less than Y star. We have a demand side problem. Prices are sticky and output is demand driven. Wait a minute.
So this difference doesn't have any major like economic implication, basically.
Just 1 minute. I'll come to your question. So in this part, during recession, you can see that the supply curve is something like this. Okay. Prices are sticky, output is demand driven. But as the economy approaches full employment during boom, the supply curve becomes horizontal. Okay. Now, if you look at this diagram, if you come over here, suppose you start from a position where the economy is in a recession. So what should be your policy? You should stimulate the economy. So when you start stimulating the economy, it moves away from recession and you move towards a boom cycle, the boom part of the trade cycle or the business cycle. So what happens is you are coming towards this side. So if you adopt a very hyperactive policy, the problem is, instead of stopping at this point, you may reach this point. And if you continue stimulating the economy, there will be no real effect, in the sense that output will not increase, but you will have inflation. Prices are going to go up very sharply. Okay, so this is regarding the supply curve. It is perhaps not accurate to think of it as a matter of timing. The Keynesian case is a short-run supply curve. Classical case is a long-run supply curve. But think of it in terms of a trade cycle. That the economy during recession will have a horizontal supply curve, but as the economy moves towards full employment, the slope starts increasing and becomes almost vertical. So as we move, so I'm showing over here. So as we are moving from recession to boom, what is going to happen is the curve is going to move like this. Once we reach the peak of the boom period, the reverse process will start like this. Okay. So that means we can see it's going to go like this during a boom. But it is going to move like this when we are moving from boom to slump. So is it clear? And Kritika, sorry, you had a question which I interrupted. So I think you were saying that it doesn't have any meaning. As you can see, it has a meaning. You can think of it as fluctuations around a business cycle.
So then will the same theory can be like not theory, same reasoning can be applied to the AD curve as well?
No, in case of the aggregate demand curve, both the Keynesian and classical assume that the aggregate demand is downward sloping, is negatively sloped.
Yes, sir. But like, can it be thought of as a curve?
Oh, curve. See, I mean, if it doesn't really matter. I mean,
Yes,
see,
exactly. That's
if
what
you think of it as a, you meant the curve and line.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, see, curve and line is basically simplifying. If your results change by a large amount, you should draw it accurately. But if it changes to a marginal extent, then it's always easier to go for a linear
Yes,
formulation.
sir.
And I mean, just at this point, I mean, in both cases, Keynesian case or whatever, it's always like this. Classical Keynes, you have a negatively sloped supply curve. This is the Keynesian supply curve. So what happens is, if your demand changes, sorry, let us say this is 81, this is 82. So as your demand increases, output changes. In Keynes, output increases, price remains sticky. But if you look at the classical case, what happens? I'll come to this. Actually, I'm going to explain this subsequently. In the classical case, you can see that price increases, output is constant. So demand doesn't have any effect on output. Okay, so it's a matter of timing. And
Sir,
now let us.
for the previous slide once.
This one.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, although I've used demand curve in the diagram, so far our discussion was limited to the supply side. Now I'm going to introduce the demand side.
So I'm going to show the slide before this one as well.
So I'm going to go back in time.
Sir, done. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Okay, so now we come to the theory of prices. Now remember that when we want to determine prices of whatever commodity inputs, we need both the demand and supply curves, right? Ultimately, it's the same micro model. Demand equal to supply will give the price. In the classical case, however, let's see how prices are determined. The starting point in case of the classical is the quantity theory of money, which was developed by Irving Fisher in the first part of I think it's 1912 or whatever. So this is an identity. It is an identity which relates the volume of transactions at a current prices to the supply of money into the turnover of each unit of money. What is turnover? So suppose I give you a 500 rupees note. You go and buy 500, something which is worth 500, right? Now the shopkeeper has got the 500. The shopkeeper will use the 500 to buy something else. Okay. So what you have is a series, you can think of it as a series of jump. A passes the note to B passes it to C passes it to D. Let us say this is in 1 month. So although I have given only 500, what is the total volume of transactions? $500 into 3, right? What is 3? 3 is the that I've given you the 500 rupees note. How many transactions, how many times has this 500 been, has this particular note been used? This is often called the velocity of money, V. So is the concept of velocity clear? So if I issue, let us say, I'm the central bank and I issue 4 500 rupee notes. What is the total amount of transactions that can be done using these 4 500 notes? If we assume that the velocity, average velocity obviously, is 300 for every note, that means every currency will have undertaken, the transaction value will be 1,500. I've got 4 such notes, so I have issued 2,500 into 4, and the velocity of money is 3. So that means this is the amount of transactions that these 4 currency notes has been used for. Okay. Now I can also look at it in a different way. What is the total number of goods which are bought and sold? I call this T. And P is the prices. So this is the, on one side, this is the value of transactions. The value of transactions can also be measured by M into V. And obviously these two will have to be equal. If you have too few currency notes, what will happen is V will simply shoot up. If you have if I issue a large number of currency notes, V will come down. So V is defined as an ex post residual, given the value of M, P, and T. So if I give you the value of P, T, and M, you can always find out what is the value of V, which will ensure that the two sides are always same.
Sir, can you explain the change in V, like the increase or decrease in V once again?
আচ্ছা, ধরো তোমার ফর কনভিনিয়েন্স আমি ধরে নিচ্ছি প্রাইস হচ্ছে 1. ওকে, and let us say that output is rupees 50,000. Clear? So that means, what is the value of transactions in equilibrium? Or a 50,000 worth commodity is brought and sold in the market. So that means আমি রুপিসটা লিখছি না, হ্যাঁ? So that means the volume of transaction has to be 50,000. Now suppose I have issued money worth 10,000. So with 10,000, is it possible for the economy to buy 50,000? Yes, if because the money changes hands. So it is basically 50,000 equal to 10,000 into V. তাহলে কত হচ্ছে এখানে V টা? V will be 5. Now suppose I reduce the money supply. The money supply is reduced to 5,000. তাহলে কি হচ্ছে? 50,000 commodity, 5,000 into V. What is V now? Money must interchange hands faster. V must go up to 10. Money যদি আমি বাড়িয়ে দিই, instead of 50,000, I make it 25,000. You can easily check, money will not change hands so frequently. It will be only 2. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, by T, we generally mean the purchase of newly produced commodities and exchange of commodities which had been produced in the earlier periods, and also financial assets. For instance, you are reselling a product, second-hand market. So instead of doing that, what we can reframe the quantity theory equation as MV identical to PY, when Y is the current output. So again, in the case you can find, you can easily solve for V, define V as PY by M, and this will again be an exposed residual variable. Depending on the money supply, V will go up or go down. Okay, we are going to use this equation. ঠিক আছে? Now, Fisher argued that M, V, and T are defined by institutional factors. V and T are defined by institutional factors, and M by the monetary authorities.
Sir, can you show the slide before this starts?
I can, but I will not.
Yes.
Okay. So, the equilibrium values of M, V, and T are given. V is determined by the payment habits and technology of the society. For instance, if all of you use credit cards, will you require a large money supply? But if you don't use credit cards, you need a larger money supply. What are the payment habits? When do you get payments? Is it monthly, after long periods, or is it every day? If you get every day, the V will go up. Output is determined from the labor market. Given population, you have a certain number of workers, and this will give you your output level. M, or money supply, is controlled by the central bank. Therefore, P is the only variable in the equation, and its value is defined by the values of M, V, and T. Fisher argued that given what I've written in the slide, that V, Y, and M is exogenous, the price level will vary directly. I mean, look over here, this will be easy to understand. Price level is going to vary directly with M and velocity of money. It is going to vary inversely with the value of trade done by it. Fisher uses T, but we can also use Y over here if we use the second alternative formulation of the quantity theory, MV equal to PY. This is the quantity theory of money. So that means given V, Y, and M, we can solve for P. And this P is the equilibrium price. Okay, so based on the labor market conditions, we had found out what is the full employment output level, what is Y, but we don't know what is P. Now the quantity theory gives us P, not the demand curve, as I said when I started off the discussion. In microeconomics, in order to find out price, you need both demand and supply. In case of the Keynesian model, however, you don't need prices because prices are constant. They are not changing. If you know price today, you know price tomorrow, day after tomorrow. In the classical case, price is a variable, but we can find out what is price without bringing in aggregate demand. Price is independent of aggregate demand. That is why we say that compared to the Keynesian case, which is a demand side model, the classical model is supply side. Okay, any questions up to this point? Okay. Now, the Fisher's quantity theory of money was reformulated, and we call this the Cambridge approach. Marshall and A.C. Pigou. Yeah.
So in the quantity theory of money, why do we only take the first three relations? It mentioned that we take the first three relations.
What first three relations?
Oh, acha. Yes,
তিনটি রিলেশন আছে তো এখানে, তাই না?
I got it.
হ্যাঁ, এটা জাস্ট একটু পুরনো তো, দে আর ভেরি স্টিফ ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ। আচ্ছা, okay. So the Cambridge approach also focuses on the proportional relation between M and P. See, এখানে তোমার তিনটে ইকুয়েশন আছে, সরি তিনটে রিলেশন আছে, P with M, P with V, P with Y, but in our case, we are focusing on the relation between P and M. If the money supply goes up, the price is going to go up. If the money supply comes down, the price will also come down. Yes. So, this proportional relation between money supply and price is also the focus in the Cambridge case. But the foundation of the relationship was less mechanistic. Fisher just showed mathematically. You have P equal to MB by Y, so that means we can take V and Y as, if V divided by Y is constant, it is P is directly proportional to M. There's no economic intuition behind this relationship. Pigou, however, pointed out that there was a logic underlying this relationship. What is this logic? It is based on micro foundations, the decisions and preferences of individuals. See, in order to undertake transactions, you demand money. If you want to undertake more transactions, you require more money. At the same time, you can also have unforeseen emergencies. You may have an emergency, your requirement of money suddenly goes up. So you hold money because in order to meet the foreseen transactions, and also to meet emergencies. So it is similar to the transactions and precautionary demand for Keynes. How is this different from Keynes?
There's no speculative demand.
So the speculative.
Yeah, you only have the KPY, not the LR. Okay. So, Pico continued that if you need money to undertake transactions, partly it will depend on the prices. If the prices goes up, you need more money. So prices will come into the picture P, and you have K, a small k, which is a constant proportionally. K can be interpreted as 1 by V. Right? I mean, you can just rewrite the equation like this: MD equal to KPY. You bring in money supply, M equal to KPY. So KPY is equal to M by K. If you want to go to the Fisher formulation, 1 by K is simply V, velocity of money. So it's simply the Cambridge model is similar. They just use, instead of V, they use 1 by K. That is the only difference. But the advance that Pigou made was he explained the demand for money in terms of transaction and precautionary demand. He may not have used the words. Keynes brought, or subsequently these terms were used, but so suppose M is increased, you are going to have an excess supply of money, right? Consumers will want to spend more on consumption and investment commodities. So this is going to increase the demand for commodities, which will lead to excess demand in the commodity market and which will lead to a price rise. So this is the logic behind this. We are
Sir.
holding money. Yeah.
Sir, since in this
Yes.
approach speculative demand is not considered, so for the case of excess supply of money, any changes of interest rate will also not be considered.
So far, we don't see any role of interest rate coming over here.
Okay, sir.
The only change is in P. Okay. So if money is increased, we hold money just to undertake transactions. So you have an excess supply, you're going to spend more, you have excess demand in the output market, price rises. What happens if money supply is reduced? What will happen if money supply is reduced?
Consumers will spend less on consumption and investment.
Yeah. So you're going to have excess supply in the commodity
Supply.
market and price will fall. So the classical aggregate demand curve can be drawn in this manner. See, we have P and Y. So if you have P, a constant P and Y, it means you can take the M on this side. So that means if money supply is constant, M by K, Py is equal to M by K. The product Py is equal to M by K, which is a constant. So what is this an equation of? This will generate a curve. What is the curve called?
It's a rectangular hyperbola.
Exactly. So I have a rectangular hyperbola. Forget about the other properties. The important property is it is negatively sloped. Right? So you have a negatively sloped demand curve. But remember, this has been drawn for a particular money supply. If you increase money supply, keeping everything same, this rectangle is going to increase. So this is M by K. Now, if you increase the money supply, then that means the rectangle has to be larger. So that means the curve will shift outwards. So as money supply increases, the aggregate demand curve will shift outwards. And if money supply contracts, the curve is going to shift inwards. Clear? By the way, what is the time? Okay, 20 minutes left.
So what is the like M by K at that point is the slope? Like
না না এই রেক্ট্যাঙ্গেলটা
আচ্ছা,
এটা তুমি এটা দিস ইজ ওয়াই দিস ইজ পি তাহলে প্রোডাক্টটা কি হবে পি ইন্টু ওয়াই দিস ইজ এম বাই কে এইখান থেকেই পাচ্ছি আমি Is it clear?
yes sir.
Okay. Now for a given money supply, therefore, suppose the money supply is M1. So you're going to have, this is the aggregate demand curve. If money supply goes up to M2, this will be your aggregate demand curve. Okay. So forget about these two demand curves. This is your demand curve. This is the supply curve. And your equilibrium price will be P1. Right? What will happen if money supply increases? If money supply increases, the aggregate demand curve shifts outwards. What happens to the supply curve? It is vertical. Therefore, is there any change in output? No. The only change in the model is an increase in prices. So as the aggregate supply curve is vertical, an expansionary or contractionary monetary policy, for that matter, does not have any impact on output. What will happen is the price is going to go up. So if we find okay, any questions? So you can see that as money supply is going up, the demand curve is shifting and the price is moving from P1 to P2 and then P3. That is why we say that the classical model is supply side. Demand doesn't determine prices. You will see that demand does have a role, but not the role that we normally conceptualize demand to have. So the impact of money can be seen, becomes very glaring during hyperinflation. Hyperinflation, as you know, is very, very sharp rise in prices. And they are generally accompanied by similar increases in money supply. See, if you go back, one of the reasons why Hitler came to power was, of course, the Treaty of Versailles, under which Germany was subjugated by the other European countries. And this gave a blow to Germany's pride. But the economic conditions during the 20s really plummeted. And one of the problem areas was inflation. 322% was the monthly inflation rate. So that means if prices was is 10 now. After 1 year, after 1 month, it is going to become something like 35, 32, 33. This is the rate at which prices were increasing. And one reason was that money supply was also growing at an almost similar rate, 314%. Hungary, after the First World War, Second World War, when there was uncertain, inflation was 19,800%. Money supply increased at 12,200%. So you can see the more recent data, 80s, in Latin America. The inflation rate is huge, 962, 875, 399, 256. And they are all fueled by growths in money supply. Okay. Now, we have brought in the theory of demand. We have incorporated demand into the classical model. Right? But it is not an explicit theory of demand in the sense that we don't really take up the different components of aggregate demand, consumption, investment, government spending. We don't disaggregate demand and look and explain how the consumption level is fixed, how investment is fixed, and so on. Instead, given M and V, and remember V is supposed to be constant, M is a policy variable. Given M and V, we focus on the price output combination, which will ensure that the money market is in equilibrium. Okay, so given M, given V, I know what is the product of P and Y. So it's simply finding out the correct combination of P and Y. And if Y is given, the problem becomes simpler. So any excess demand or excess supply will spill over to the commodity markets as individuals try to adjust their expenditures on commodities. So they are represented by points on the demand curve. And there is and this aggregate demand curve basically represents equilibrium with respect to money holdings. So if you're on the demand curve, you have an optimal money holding, and you also have to ensure that the expenditure on commodities are optimal. Now, as I've said, aggregate demand can be decomposed into consumption or savings, investment, and G. Now, they play an explicit role not in determining output, but in determining the interest rate. The change in the interest rate ensures that the changes in composition of C, I, and G does not affect aggregate demand. What will happen is R will change in the impact of a change in R is on the composition of demand, not on the aggregate demand. In the Keynesian model, if the rate of interest increased, see, C was a function of Y, C will be unchanged, G is a constant, I, however, is a function of R. So, the aggregate demand will change as a result of a change in interest rate. But in the classical model, C, I, and G will adjust in such a way, one of them will squeeze out the other, so that the aggregate demand always remains the same. And therefore, it does not lead to any real change in the model. Okay.
Sir, by real change, did you mean like any?
এক মিনিট আমার দুটো ভুল আছে, একটু চেক করে নিতে দাও না এখানে। কোথায় ছিল? এখানে দেখো তো একটা বাই আর ওয়াই হয়ে এটা গাই হয়ে গেছে। বাই Classical theory. হ্যাঁ, কি বলছো তুমি?
So when you said that it doesn't lead to any real change, do you mean that nominal sense a change হয়? Like it does affect demand in
এবার
an
তোমার কথা কেটে গেল। You mean that মানে W can change, wage can change, but not W by P. Output will not change. The labor supply, the amount of labor used will not change. এরকম আর কি। কিন্তু প্রাইসেস এগুলো সব চেঞ্জ করতে পারে। দিস আর মানি ভেরিয়েবলস, ডাব্লিউ পি এগুলো চেঞ্জ করবে, বাট নট দ্য এগ্রিগেট ডিমান্ড, নট দ্য এগ্রিগেট সাপ্লাই। Okay, so this is actually what we call the classical dichotomy. The real sector and the monetary sector are independent. We'll discuss this later on, but it's always good if you know what you're going to study. So the classical dichotomy is that there are two sectors in the economy: the real sector where output is determined, and the monetary sector where the money variables are determined. And the classical dichotomy says that these two sectors are independent of each other. Changes in the monetary sector will not affect the real sector. Let's see if I can. Okay. It will be a bit of a tight pressure, but let's see if I can finish it. Okay. Now, how is the equilibrium rate of interest determined? You know the theory. It is the loanable funds theory. Okay. And the equilibrium rate of interest, it basically assumes that you have two groups of people. One group of agents seek to lend, and there's another group of agents who seek to borrow. So you are lending and I'm borrowing from you. And if the amount that you want to lend and the amount that I want to borrow are equal, we have equilibrium in the investment market. The function of interest rate is to ensure that the demand and supply sides of funds are equal. Now we assume that when we're talking about lending, borrowing, this occurs not in the form that I approach you and say that, look, can you give me $500? What you do is, or you approach me and say that, look, I have $500 to lend out. Do you want it? It's not in this form. We don't lend out or borrow in money, in currency form. It occurs, lending or borrowing occurs in the form of perpetual bonds, what we call consols. So if you want to borrow, you're going to issue a bond. So Udita will issue a bond, Udita Incorporated, and those of us who want to lend out money will buy the bonds from her, and she is going to get the money. Okay. So what is the interest rate now? As I've purchased the bond, I will get a rate of return every year. So if the bonds are for 5%, that means every year I'm going to get 5%. This is the returns to my savings. Those who borrow, they have to pay the 5% interest rate. So interest to them is the cost of borrowing. So that means interest rate can be interpreted in two ways. It's like Janus, the Greek god of doors. It is the cost of borrowing to firms who issue the it's the cost of borrowing to firms who issue the bonds It is the returns to savings to the consumers who have purchased the consoles. It's at the same time, it is not just firms, but the government may also issue bonds. For instance, if government has spent more than taxes, they have a budgetary deficit. This deficit has to be financed. They can either monetize the deficit by issuing currency notes, money supply goes up. This is called monetization of deficit. Or they can decide to issue bonds. So if they say that, okay, if this is my deficit, I'm going to monetize 50% of the deficit. The remaining 50% has to be financed by issue of consoles. So the rate of interest will be the cost of borrowing to the government also, to the firm, to the government who issues the consoles. Okay, so the demand for funds, let's see, now let's go to the next. Okay. Why do people demand funds, or who demand funds? One is the government. As I've said, they want to finance their budgetary surplus, the budgetary deficit. Now, the government demand for funds is an exogenous policy variable, right? At the same time, we have the firms. They are the main person who demand funds. They want to invest this money. They want to expand their business, the scale of operations. So what they do is they consider the different projects they have. Let us say at any point of time, they have n number of projects. I1, I2, I3 are all projects. Each of the project has an associated return on it. So let us say that in the first case, I'm going to you have I1, I2. Or let me call it pi, that will be easier. I don't want to use I over here, and R cannot be used. So corresponding to each project, I have a particular return. So I rank them. Right? So this is my returns to investment. Let us say that the rate of interest is 4%. Is this project feasible? Is I1 feasible? What's the matter?
So it is not feasible in the first few years, but then it becomes
No,
feasible.
it's not the first few years. These are all different projects. This is not time. Suppose this is you're setting up a factory in Chandanagar, you're setting up a shoe factory in Batanagar, you're setting up a kangaroo farm in Calcutta, like this. These are all different projects, and each of them has a certain rate of return. So is the first project feasible?
No, sir.
No.
Acha, the second project?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Acha. So which project onwards will be feasible?
4.1.
The fifth project onwards, the 4.1, 4.5.
So 4.1 onwards will be feasible. Right. Acha. Now suppose your rate of interest goes up from 4 to 5%. What will happen now? So initially you're going to invest in these 3 projects, right? If rate of interest goes up to 5, will you invest more or less?
So less.
So now this is the critical level. You're going to invest only in this. Acha. Suppose your interest rate falls to, let us say, 2.5. So you will invest in all the projects except I1. So what we can see is that as R goes up, a smaller number of projects remain feasible. So that means I is going to come down. And if R decreases, more projects become viable, I is going to go up. So private investment demand is a decreasing function of R. Okay, we can write I is a function of R and I prime is negative, right? G is also part of demand for funds, but G, we had argued, is an exogenous policy variable. So if you come to the last line, your aggregate investment demand can be defined as private investment, which is a function of R, plus G, which is exogenous. So therefore, the aggregate investment demand is a negative function of R. Is it clear, everyone?
So here G is the government spending.
G is the government spending. Not, sorry, G, well, actually এখানে আমি G লিখে দিয়েছি, এটা ঠিক G হচ্ছে না, মানে the amount which is not monetized. Suppose T is 0, তাহলে এখানে G আসবে. It will actually be a part of G minus T. গভর্নমেন্ট বন্ডস কতটা হচ্ছে আর কি, একটা কাজ করি, এটাকে জিবি করে দিই। So GB is the G minus T যতটা বন্ড দিয়ে ফাইন্যান্স হচ্ছে। So it is exogenous, it depends on policy. G minus T টাকে ডিটারমিন্ড হবে, তারপরে হচ্ছে কতটা আমি মনিটাইজ করব, কতটা বন্ড ফাইন্যান্সিং দিয়ে কভার করব। So it is a exogenous policy variable. For all intents and purposes, it is constant. তাহলে investment demand is a function of R. Now let us come to the supply of funds. Who supply funds? Households. They save and purchase the consoles. Now saving is an intertemporal choice. If you save, that means you're reducing your current consumption now. Why are you accepting this sacrifice? Because your future consumption is going to go up. So if your rate of interest increases, it means you're going to get more in the future. So it's quite likely that in that case, there's as R goes up, you're going to save more and you're able to consume more in the future. The choice becomes tilted towards future consumption. Savings increases, you're able to acquire more consumption goods in the future. And if you hold money, right, there's no returns. So if you save, you may hoard some money in order to meet emergencies, but generally you're going to invest in bonds. Okay. Now, what was the Keynesian savings function?
So y
This
minus
is the
C.
classical savings function.
So y minus C.
Sorry,
minus a plus y.
it is a function of the Keynesian savings function is a function of y,
Y, yes, sir.
but this is a function of r. Okay, so you can see that small changes are coming in. The edifice that we had built up in the earlier semester has to be changed. Now, if you want to, in the case of the savings, suppose you have depression and economic stress. See, there can be a bank panic, there can be a run on banks, bankruptcies will occur. And so you feel that, okay, if I'm going to lend out or keep it in the form of fixed deposits, term deposits, it's possible that I'm going to lose my money. In such cases, we are going to hoard our wealth in the form of money. In such cases, we are going to hoard our wealth in the form of money. But in normal times, whatever savings we have is going to be held in the form of bonds. So during depression, economic stress, people may be afraid to invest. So if they have any extra money, they are going to hoard it. But during normal times, people are will not hoard because money doesn't fetch any interest rate. So if they make any savings, it is going to be invested in bonds. And this comprises the supply of funds.
Sir, can you please explain the bond financing and the monetization of deficit once again?
এই জায়গাটা
Sir, yes.
আচ্ছা, যেটা হচ্ছে যে what happens is that, as you know, the government has G and T. Okay, G is the government spending, T is the tax revenue. If your budget is balanced, G minus T is equal to 0, there is no problem. But suppose T is very low, so you're spending more than you are getting as tax revenue. You're getting 1,000 rupees as tax revenue, but you want to spend 5,000 rupees. Where will the government get this money from? This budgetary deficit can be financed in two ways. One is through an increase in money supply. You print notes, you borrow from the Reserve Bank. We call this monetization or deficit financing. Sorry, not deficit, it's called monetization of your deficit. Apart from this, so this will lead to an increase in money supply. Apart from monetization, the government can also issue bonds. So they issue bonds, people purchase the bonds, and the proceeds of the bond sale comes to the government. Right? So this comprises demand for funds. So when I'm talking about investment, you have two components. One is the private investment, which is IP and is a function of rate of interest. The other part is component is part of the deficit, which you are not monetizing. It can be the whole of this amount, it can be zero, or it can be some value. But this is determined by the government based on their own considerations. So, for policy purpose, it is given to us. It is a policy variable. It is not determined by the market conditions. It is determined solely by the government or the policymakers.
Sir, so the government is the sole demander of bonds.
This is demand for funds, not demand for bonds. Demand for funds means supply of bonds. এইটা একটু মাথায় রাখো। তুমি বন্ড ইস্যু করবে কেন? তোমার টাকা দরকার বলে তো ইস্যু করবে। So if you demand funds, you are going to supply bonds. একটু ভেবে দেখো, এই পার্টটা আমি আবার সামনের দিন থেকে করাবো। But just think of it. Demand for funds is the same thing as supply of bonds. When I'm talking about supply of funds, so that means you are saving and giving me money. How can you give me money? By purchasing bonds. So supply of funds means demand for bonds. এইটা একটু বোঝার চেষ্টা করো, হ্যাঁ? If you from the next class, I'm going to start from slide 41 and come to the investment determination of R. Okay, so any more questions? Otherwise, I'll close it. Okay, so I'm stopping the recording.